Hi friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If this is your first time watching my videos, my name is Crystal. I post all kinds of book content here on my channel. So if you are a fellow bookworm, I would love it if you would subscribe. But I'm very excited about today's video because the other day on my Instagram, I posted a question box asking for bookish questions so that I could do another Q&A here on my channel. I had so much fun with the last Q&A that I did, so I just decided to do another one. So here we are. So if you are watching this video and you submitted a question for me over on my Instagram, thank you. I had a lot of really great questions, so I'm excited to get into them today. All right, the first question I got is the last book that I DNF'd. I have a really tough time DNFing books, and I think it's because I'm one of those people that I hate not finishing things that I start. I always have this little hope inside me that maybe the book will get better, or I just need to know how it ends. It's funny because every time I want to DNF a book and I push through it and I'm like, maybe it'll get better, it never really does. So I just gotta trust my instinct. And whenever I feel like I want to DNF a book, I just need to accept it and just do it. So I'm gonna be quite honest. I have only DNF'd one book that I can remember off the top of my head. And that is this one, The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. I just could not get into this book. I was just not into it. I don't know if it was the book. I do think it was somewhat the book because I didn't really love the writing of it. It was just so boring. I also remember that right after I was gonna finish this book, I planned to read the Ravenhood series. So I had those books on deck to read. I don't know if it was just me trying to rush through this book, or I wasn't paying enough attention because I was so excited about my next read. Maybe I'll give this book another chance at some point in my life, but not anytime soon. Now, these next two books I want to talk about, I didn't technically DNF these books, but I wish I would have. And it's these two, Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin and Bunny by Mona Awad. These are two books that I absolutely would have DNF'd if it wasn't for a specific reason. Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow was one of our book club reads for 1 month, a few months back. And if it wasn't for us reading this in book club, I absolutely would have stopped reading this with no problem. I knew right off the bat that this book was not for me. I didn't like the writing. I didn't like the characters. I didn't like the storyline. Literally nothing about this book that I really liked. Everyone raves about this book and how much they love it. I don't. And Bunny, I was actually reading this for a YouTube video. This was one of the books that Jacob picked out for me to read. I believe it was in August. And if it wasn't for him picking my books for me and me wanting to do a review of all the books that he picked for me, I would have DNF'd this book as well. This is just the most bizarre book that I've ever read in my life. And I still, to this day, couldn't tell you what happened or what is going on in this book. It is just bizarre. I did like this book more than I liked this one. So, also, what was that? I just heard a knock on the window. Albus heard it too because he looked over there. And I'm on the second floor. So there's no way someone can be knocking on my window when I'm on the second floor. Okay, the next question is, what made you start your Bookstagram and how did you become successful in it? So I started my Bookstagram in February of 2022 is when I started my Bookstagram. I actually used to share all of my book content over on my main Instagram page. I will put all of those here in case y'all are interested in checking them out or following along with me over there on those platforms. But I was sharing all of my book content on my main page. I would share my reviews, my current reads. One day, someone messaged me, and I wish I knew who this was so that I could message her and tell her thank you. But someone messaged me and gave me the idea of potentially starting a book club account. And she was just like, I love all your book content. I would love to see more book content. Obviously, I know that this page is more for fashion and beauty. So what would you think about maybe starting a book club page? If you do start that, I would love to follow along. I immediately was like, that is actually not a bad idea. So I just started my Instagram, Crystal's Book Club. At first I was like, well, maybe I'll just post reviews on here, or maybe we can create a Facebook page where we can talk about books and stuff like that. But I was like, you know what? No, I want to start an actual virtual book club, even if it's small. I just want to start something where we can talk about books together, and not just in DMs or not just in comments. I want something more intimate, where I can actually talk to other people about books and I can create this bond over one of my favorite things in the world, which is books. So I decided to make it a virtual book club and not only do book reviews and share book photos and what I'm currently reading, but I also incorporated Zoom meetings every month where I pick a book for our book club. We read that book at our own pace. At the end of every month, we'll come together over a Zoom meeting and talk about the book together. I'm incredibly grateful for it. It has brought me so many amazing friendships. It has created just this little book community that I am just incredibly thankful for. A couple months after I started it, I decided to just jump onto YouTube and start creating book videos here on YouTube. And that has been an absolute blast as well. I love this space so much. So if you are here from my Bookstagram or if you're here just as a subscriber to my YouTube channel, I can't thank you enough for being here. It really, really means a lot to me. All right, I could talk about this for years, so let's go ahead and move on to the next question. The next question is, what do you do with all of your books after you read them? Do you keep them forever? Do you sell them or do you donate? For the most part, I keep all of the books that I read. My books just mean a lot to me and I just feel like a special connection with all the books that I read. I also, one of my goals in life is to just have like a big library, just a big wall full of books, or even just like a big room full of books. I just love to collect them. I love looking at them every day. I have them displayed all around my house. But recently I actually have thought about taking some of the books that I like didn't enjoy or books that I just don't love and donating them or just taking them to half price books. But yeah, for the most part, I keep all of my books. I display them. One day I hope to have just like a big room library full of books. Okay, the next question, I love this question so much. If you could combine two books into one book world, which would they be? This is so random, but this is the combination that I'm gonna go with. So it's gonna be Indigo Ridge by Devney Perry and Twilight by Stephenie Meyer. These are two totally different books, but I am just in love with the setting of both of these books. Indigo Ridge, this is part of the Edens series, and they live in this small town of Quincy, Montana, and it is the cutest, quaintest, most heartwarming, wholesome little town. But the vibes in Twilight, like in terms of the weather and the atmosphere, my dream. They are immaculate. They are my dream come true because it is rainy, it is cold, it is dark, there's like never any sun. And if I could combine that atmosphere with the small town setting in the Edens series, a cozy, small little quaint town with rainy, dark, gloomy, cold weather. Next question is, what is the worst book you have ever read? I mean, I think y'all probably know what I'm gonna say because I've already talked about it. I mean, it's this one. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I already talked about it before. Everything about this book I just did not like. The writing is just not my style of writing. It's very artsy and it's almost to this point where it's like a little bit too try hard. Like there's so many sentences and words and terminology used in this book that felt very forced. I also didn't like the characters in this book either. I went into this book thinking it was going to be about friendship and kind of a friendship growing into a meaningful relationship. While it is about friendship, and while it is about the relationship of the characters in this book, I didn't like their friendship at all. I thought they were awful to each other. I also didn't like the themes in this book, and it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that this is about video games, but I think there's a lot of underlying messages in this that I just didn't like and I didn't connect with, and it just wasn't for me. Next question is, are there any books that have made you cry or any that you have been legitimately scared? I am not someone that cries very easily in books, so if I'm crying in a book, that says a lot. I have only cried in 4 books. I can count them on one hand. We have Night Road by Kristen Hanna, which if you have not read this, run to read it. This book is so freaking good. If you have read Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover, this book is very similar to that in terms of plot, but this book has much better writing, much better characters, much better development, a lot more meaning, a lot more depth. Next, we have One Last Rainy Day by Kate Stewart. Kate Stewart is one of my favorite authors. She is the author of the Ravenhood series, which is one of my favorite series of all time. It is dark romance. This book, oh my gosh. This book did things to me. If you have not read the Ravenhood series and you like dark romance, it is very spicy as well. So if you like spicy, adult, dark romance, and you have not read the Ravenhood series, you need to read it. number one. You have to read it. There's Flock, Exodus, and The Finish Line. Those are the first 3 books. And this book is actually a spinoff of the Ravenhood series. So there is one main character in the Ravenhood series, and this book is told in his perspective, which you don't get in the original 3 books. The only way that I can describe the series, if someone were asking, like, what is it about? If you just think of like Fast and the Furious or Sons of Anarchy, like combine those 2 together, sort of like the gang type of vibe, and then you add a lot of spice into it. It's something similar to that. Like, that's the only way that I can explain it. This book is just everything to me. It is everything. The whole series is everything to me. And we have another Kristen Hanna book. I didn't realize I had 2 Kristen Hanna books in here that made me cry, but this is another Kristen Hanna book that got me, The 4 Winds. This book is set during the Great Depression, and it's basically about a family who is trying to survive during those times. And so you basically are taken through all of their struggles and what they went through. This is just another one that if you have not read it, you absolutely must. But again, it is sad and you probably will cry. So. And then we have Say You Swear by Megan Brandy. This is actually a book that I recently just read. I have a whole entire reading vlog on this book. I will link that down below if you want to check it out. But I loved this book so much. There are some things that happen a little bit towards the end of the book that, oh my God. If you watch my vlog, you will see my reactions to this and you'll see me crying while reading this. Just aside from that, this book is not sad. There's just one scene that got me because there's a relationship that's happening in this book that just kind of hit close to home for me and just really pulled at my heartstrings. But this is basically a college football romance. It's funny, it's a little bit spicy, it was very nostalgic for me because it is set in college, and so it just kind of took me back to my college days. But I absolutely loved this. If you haven't read it, you definitely need to. It is a longer book. It's like almost 550 pages, which is pretty long for a romance, but it went by really, really fast. So I really enjoyed this if you haven't read it. And then the second part of that question is books that legitimately scared me. This one is tough because I can't say that I've ever been like legitimately scared in a book. My scare threshold is very, very, very high, but I have had some books that have really creeped me out. These are them. First off, we have House of Shadows by Darcy Coates. This is like a gothic horror. This book has like a little bit of a historical undertone to it because it's not set in present day. It's set like way back when. This is also very gothic and dark. There are some paranormal scenes in this book that genuinely creeped me out. Next, we have The Girls in the Cabin by Caleb Stevens. You've watched any of my most recent videos. Y'all know that I cannot shut up about this book. It is so freaking good. This is a psychological thriller, and the setting of this is really what creeped me out the most because this is set in just like a spooky cabin in the woods, and it's very dark. It is storming, it's snowy, it's cold, and there are some things that happen in this cabin that are just creepy. That's the only word to describe it. Next, I have Hidden Pictures by Jason Rekulak. This is one of my favorite books of all time. The thing that creeped me out the most in this book were the actual drawings and pictures. I don't want to show you any of the creepy pictures because I don't want to ruin it in case you haven't read it. There are literally drawings like this all throughout the book, and some of the drawings in this book they're disturbing and spooky, and I loved it so much. Okay, last one I want to talk about is Does It Hurt by H.D. Carlton. This is technically a spicy adult dark romance, but this book has a very like thriller-like undertone. The 2 characters in this book get in a boat accident and they stumble upon this really creepy lighthouse, and they go inside this lighthouse to seek shelter. And what they find in the lighthouse is absolutely wild. I loved it. Technically, again, it is dark romance, but I just loved the dark thriller-like undertone that this has. And there were some scenes that legitimately freaked me out. Okay, the next 2 questions have to do with Sarah J. Maas books. So I love that. The first question is, I'm wanting to get into Sarah J. Maas books. Where do I start and what order do I read them in? So I will say I have read A Court of Thorns and Roses, the entire series, and I have read Throne of Glass, the entire series. I still have not read Crescent City yet, though. I do plan to read the first book in November or December, depending on how I'm feeling. I personally think that you should read these books, and if you have not read any Sarah J. Maas books yet, I stand by this order. Even though I haven't read Crescent City, I still stand by this order. I know enough to know that this is the best order to read these books in. First, you're gonna wanna read A Court of Thorns and Roses. Hands down, no question, read ACOTAR first. The reason why I say this is because ACOTAR is the least complicated series. Now, I know I haven't read Crescent City, but I do know just from things that I've heard and friends that have read it that Crescent City is the most complicated series of the three. Also, one of the main themes in this book is romance. And because of all of that romance, I just feel like there's less world building, there's less politics, and there's more romance in these books. Now, obviously, there is going to be some world building, there is going to be some politics, there's a lot of magic, there's a lot of fantasy. It is a fantasy series, but a really big, heavy theme in the ACOTAR series is romance. And so I personally think this is going to be the best series to start with because it's not going to be as complicated or hard to get into. I also think that if you read this series first, you will absolutely understand the Throne of Glass series a lot better because there are some things that are talked about and there are some words that are used in the ACOTAR series that will basically introduce you to the world. And then when you jump into Throne of Glass, a lot of Throne of Glass will just make so much more sense if you've already read A Court of Thorns and Roses. Now, after you have read A Court of Thorns and Roses, then you will want to read Throne of Glass. The Throne of Glass series is much more world building, fantasy driven than it is romance driven. Throne of Glass has way more detail. It's a little bit more complicated of a storyline and plot. It's a lot more intricate. Throne of Glass, in my opinion, is just very, very plot driven. There's a lot going on. There's so many just like twists and turns. The storyline takes you in so many directions. I personally think if you have A Court of Thorns and Roses under your belt and you've read that entire series, you will have a much better experience reading Throne of Glass and you'll be able to understand it a little bit better. And then once you have read Throne of Glass, then you will want to read Crescent City. I have a friend who is currently reading this and she posted on her book stories the other day, and she said that she stands by the order of ACOTAR, then Throne of Glass, then Crescent City. That is the order that I would recommend if you have not read any of the Sarah J. Maas books. Start with A Court of Thorns and Roses, then go to Throne of Glass, and then go to Crescent City. This next question. This is tough. Throne of Glass or ACOTAR, which is better? This is tough for me because I loved both series very, very much, but I loved them both for different reasons. ACOTAR I really loved because of the found family, because of the characters, and because of the romance. The romance in this series is absolutely incredible. I loved it so much. Book 2 is probably my favorite book of the series, and book 2 and then the last book, Court of Silver Flames, are very, very spicy. And the characters in this series, to me, in my opinion, are unmatched. The found family, just the relationships between all of the characters, you feel so connected to them and you actually feel like you know them. I just think that the character development and the relationships between all of the characters is just, there's nothing like it. I also really loved that the storyline and the world building is just not hard to understand. It's very easy to follow. But we have the Throne of Glass series, which is also really incredible in its own way. Throne of Glass to me is much more plot driven than A Court of Thorns and Roses. Obviously, the plot in A Court of Thorns and Roses is amazing, but the plot in Throne of Glass is like on another level. It is on another level. I also really like that Throne of Glass is a bit more violent and it's darker as well. I loved that Throne of Glass is just, the setting is a lot darker and the characters are also amazing in the Throne of Glass series. I just think that in A Court of Thorns and Roses, I feel more of a connection to them than I do the characters in Throne of Glass. And in A Court of Thorns and Roses, the romance takes a front seat, whereas in Throne of Glass, the romance takes a back seat. So I don't know. I think if I had to choose, like if my life depended on it and I had to choose, I would probably pick A Court of Thorns and Roses. Simply because I just love the romance and I love the characters and I love all their relationships. However, if you are someone who loves plot-driven fantasy with a lot of world building, a lot of politics, a lot of magic, and you don't like romance as much, then you're gonna like Throne of Glass a lot better. All right, I'm gonna do one more question, and this one is, what is your favorite book to show / movie adaptation? Normally, show to movie or show adaptations are not very good. Usually the book is so much better and the movie or the show doesn't live up to what the book was. But in these 5 that I'm going to talk about, I absolutely think that the show or the movie did the book justice. The first is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. Honestly, I think I actually liked the movie more than I liked the book. I loved the book, but the movie, I thought the movie was incredible. I think that the movie did also follow the book very well. Obviously, there's some differences here and there, but overall, I enjoyed the movie so much, and I think it absolutely did the book justice. If you are someone who didn't like Where the Crawdads Sing, like the book, watch the movie. I think that you would really like the movie even better. The casting was perfect. Jacob actually watched this movie with me, and he loved the movie as well. He actually cried. Well, I cried too while we were watching the movie, and it was really good, and I thought it was done very well. But in a nutshell, this book is about Kaya, and she basically grows up on her own, like raising herself, because her parents are going through some tough things, and she basically has to find a way to survive in the marshland. This is her story, and I thought that this book to movie adaptation was done so well. Next up is Daisy Jones and the Six. I am one of the very few people on this planet that did not like this book. I just couldn't connect with it. I think it's really hard, in my opinion, to portray music in a book. This is written in interview style, which didn't really bother me, but I feel like it did have me feeling a little bit disconnected from the book. And it's funny because when I read this, I was like, man, this would be a really good show or a movie. Like, I could see this on the TV screen, but in book form, it just wasn't really for me. I also didn't like Daisy in this book. She drove me crazy. I just didn't like the way her character was written at all. But the show was incredible. The show was so freaking good. In my opinion, the show is a million times better than the book. I know that's an unpopular opinion. I started watching the show, and I think I was like on episode 2, and Jacob came into the room and he was like kind of catching glimpses of it, and he ended up watching the entire show with me, and he absolutely loved it as well. And Jacob is a picky man when it comes to shows, and he loved it. But I just think that the show was able to portray the music obviously in such a better way than the book was, because you can actually see them on stage and you can hear their music, and in a book you can't do that. So I don't know, I just enjoyed the show so much more than I did the book. But if you loved Daisy Jones and the Six like the book, like 90% of people do, and you haven't watched the show, it is a must watch. But I'm sure if you've read Daisy Jones and the Six, you've probably already watched the show. And then next up, obviously, Harry Potter. These books not only are just some of my favorite books of all time, one of my favorite series of all time, this series is what got me back into reading after like a few years hiatus. This whole entire series has just a piece of my heart and soul. It is my favorite of all time. I want to reread the whole entire series at some point in my life. Maybe next year, maybe next fall. This series is an absolute masterpiece in my opinion. I love everything about it. And the movies are so great. I actually watched the movies before I read the books. I loved the movies so much that that's what made me decide to read the books. And then after I would finish one of the books, I would rewatch the movie that coincided with whatever book that I just finished. And that was such a fun experience. But the movies are just done so well. The graphics are amazing. The casting is amazing. The setting, they portray the setting just so perfectly. Harry Potter is a young adult fantasy series, but I think if you've never read the Harry Potter series before, don't let the fact that it's young adult stray you away from reading this series, because I didn't read this series until I was an adult, and I feel like I actually appreciated it so much more reading it as an adult than if I were to have read it when I was a kid. And I personally think like the first few books are very easy to read. If you're a teenager, you could read them. But then as the books start going on, in my opinion, they get a lot more intricate and a lot more detailed. And if I would have read those books as a teenager, I would have been completely lost. I would have been like, what's happening? So if you haven't read Harry Potter, what are you doing? Okay, the next one I want to talk about is Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. Now, this show used to be on HBO. I don't know if it's still on HBO anymore, so don't kill me if it's not. But I had to talk about this because I feel like this is one of the most underrated shows and no one talks about it. And I don't know why, because it is so, so, so good. Oh my God. And now that I'm thinking about Gillian Flynn, I should have put Gone Girl in this list as well. I'm adding Gone Girl to this book to movie adaptation list, okay? So I'm gonna put a picture of Gone Girl right here. That's another one that I absolutely loved, and the movie was amazing. It was just as good as the book. So if you haven't read Gone Girl, read it and then watch the movie. So good. Okay, anyway, back to Sharp Objects. I was so impressed with the show Sharp Objects. They did the book justice. They followed the book so well. The casting was amazing. Amy Adams is the main character in that show, and I just love Amy Adams. I love anything that she does, but she was casted perfectly and they followed the book very nicely. It was just such a good book to show adaptation. Okay, and then lastly, we have It by Stephen King. This is obviously a classic. This book is obviously a beast. It's like 1,100 pages. This is the longest book that I've ever read. If you ever decide to read this book, or if you have read this book and finished it, you deserve an award. But anyway, the movies are incredible. We have the original It movies that came out, I think it was like late 80s, early 90s. I don't remember off the top of my head. The original movies are very, very good, but I personally prefer the movies that came out a little bit later, the more recent movies. I thought that those movies followed the book a lot more closely than the original It movies did. The It movies are they're just some of my favorite horror movies ever. But if you have it in you, I would highly recommend reading the book and then watching the movies. But not only are the movies scary and creepy, the storyline in the movies is amazing. Acting is really good. It's just all around so, so great. But anyway, y'all, that does it for my Q&A today. I will definitely be doing more of these in the future. If you are not following over on my Instagram page, I will put my handle right here. I'll put my Instagram page here on the screen somewhere. I would love it if you would come follow along over there. I think my next video is going to be a reading vlog, so I'm very excited about that one. Make sure you are subscribed to my channel and you turn on the notification bell so that you don't miss any of the videos that I have coming up. But thank you guys so much for watching. I hope y'all enjoyed, and I will see y'all in my next video. Bye!